Welcome to the Food Studies Zoom lecture series. As I was saying, as we were kind of gathering a few minutes ago, unfortunately, we're not together, sitting around the table in Columbia Hall, but that has its pros and cons because we have people who are gathering around this virtual table who are in other places. So, one of the pros of it is that we can include people from distant locations or places that are close but not manageable for us to get together. So having this virtual space to do these talks in and get together, see each other's faces, connect a little bit has been really great. And I'm grateful for the participants who have been showing up to the talks and the people who have been presenting, and to Lisa for helping to coordinate them and get them recorded, which is one thing I want to mention here. We record the presentations and the discussion, so just keep that in mind as we move forward. If you're comfortable or not comfortable saying something, that's going to be recorded and put on our YouTube channel so that people can see this later. There are a lot of people who messaged me saying that they're really interested in the presentation today who aren't able to be here. So it really does become a resource going forward for other people to go back and look at. And so just be aware of that. Really very, very excited to have Professor Michael Fakhri with us today to discuss his work with the UN and his special rapporteur for the right to food. And it's super encouraging and I don't know, just a heck of a lot of pride and excitement when Michael was named to that position for the U of O, for the law school, for the campus in general, for food studies. Michael has been, as many of you know, one of the most important kind of building blocks of the program since the beginning, and just super grateful for the work that he does in community with us in food studies and now in community on the global scale for such an important issue like the right to food. And so a thank you to you, Michael, for all the work that you've been doing on the advisory committee for food studies right from the beginning and now on the global scale for the stuff that you're working on as well. Really excited to hear about the things that you've been working on. I've been reading about the things that you've been working on the internet and posts and different reports and messages and communiques that you've been putting out from your spot. And I think it really elevates the discussion, what you bring to it from your perspective in law and in food studies. And I think it also elevates the University of Oregon. So I'm super grateful to you for taking on the role. And I know that it can be a demanding role. I can imagine all the different things that you've been doing that we're going to hear about. And I know that it takes a lot of effort to do that. So grateful to you for all of that, for being part of the food studies community and for being out there in the world advancing such important work. Super grateful for you being here. Let's see. Any other, Lisa, do you want to say a few things before we get going too, in case I forgot anything? And Lisa Fink is the program assistant. Those of you who don't know, Lisa is the program assistant for food studies, and she has been such a blessing to me in trying to keep all this going. I'm super grateful to her too.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I just have a couple announcements. We wanted to let you all know that we have launched our new website for food studies, and it's mobile friendly, which is something that we were really wanting to make sure happen, that students, for example, could be looking at our website on their phones and find the information they're needing more easily. So I'm going to put that URL in the chat so that you can check it out. It also will have a few new features. On our homepage, it's going to include a playlist for all the food talks from our YouTube channel, so you can watch them all there. We're going to have a featured people section. Our first profile will be about Michael, so you can read more about him there. That will post probably later today after we talk. And then we have a contributions page, which will talk all about the various contributions the food studies community is making to the field. And so that's the website. And the other thing I want to mention was the governor's state employee food drive. And I'm going to put some information in the chat about ways that you can contribute to that food drive. We're ENBS is raising money for Food for Lane County as part of that drive. And so you can either make a one-time donation or you can create a 12-month recurring payroll deduction. You can also give canned food every Wednesday from 11 to 1. And I put a link there to the student food pantry where you can do that. And I'll just add one more resource about Food for Lane County's work. If you don't know about what they do and you want to learn more about where your donation will be going, there's a link there and you can learn more about the really great work that they do all over Lane County around food security. I think that's everything. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you, Lisa. You can see, folks, that keeping the ship afloat in this time period is challenging, but Lisa's been tremendous. You know, she's doing it from up in Portland and I'm down here. And I think we've actually done a lot for like the infrastructure of food studies in this time, and putting together that mobile friendly website is a really important accomplishment, just getting it up into the modern era so that students who are looking for information about the minor or the grad specialization can get it on their phones. It's really cool. And the new features she mentioned are great too, to be able to highlight folks who are working in the program, and also to start shining light on the kind of contributions. We kept it kind of generic in terms of like scholarly, policy oriented, any kind of contribution to food studies. So check it out when you get a chance. Michael, I'm going to turn the floor over to you, or the screen, or whatever it is we're turning over to you, the Zoom world, and thank you again for everything. And I'm glad that you're here and sharing what you're up to with us today.
Great. Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, everyone. I know, yet another webinar, Zoom meeting, staring into your computer is difficult. So I just really appreciate everyone's time. So I want to try and get to the conversation part as quickly as possible. So what I'm going to do is just describe what this position is. What is a UN Special Rapporteur? What is a UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food? And then I'll just briefly talk about how I'm trying to situate myself in this job in the context of really, since we're here as a scholarly community, how do we connect our work with communities? I think it's just an ongoing conversation we have, I think, in food studies here. And that conversation I carried with me into the world of the Special Rapporteur. And then we can just open it up to a conversation. So just let me start what this position is. It's a voluntary position, but it's more than a full-time job. This is the weird thing. So anyone can apply. You apply to the UN Human Rights Council. And so the Human Rights Council, the UN Human Rights Council, is the leading UN body on human rights, as its name implies, and it's in Geneva. And it has most of the world's governments, and it's a regional representation. So if the General Assembly in New York is where all the world governments go, from there they argue and debate, and they decide who goes to Geneva to sit on the Human Rights Council. And then there's all sorts of special rapporteurs, independent experts. It's just a fancy word for independent expert. And there's for food, there's water, indigenous rights, racism, solidarity. There's over 40 rapporteurs and independent experts, or sometimes there's a working group, there's a committee of people. And you apply and they pick you, and the idea is that they give you a mandate and they say, okay, we're gonna deem you to be the leading expert to tell us and the world everything about your mandate. So in my case, about the right to food, that has to do with hunger, malnutrition, food security, all from a human rights perspective. So I'm accountable to the Human Rights Council, to the world's governments, and to the General Assembly. And so here's the sort of the basics of what I have to do. I have to write 2 thematic reports a year. So I have full autonomy, full independence. I decide what those themes are, but I have to make sure they're relevant for the governments, for civil society, social movements, advocacy groups. I've already written 2, and one I presented to the General Assembly in New York, meaning just yelling again into my computer in my attic. And then my second report just came out in December, and I'm going to present it to the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva in 2 weeks. And the first theme, so I got this position in May. I don't know if you can remember May. I don't remember May. It was the weirdest time for COVID, right? So from March, is when things start changing in terms of, we're also now making hard choices, March, April. May, I'm a special rapporteur. June, I had to submit my first report. And it's like this delirious fever dream. Someone wrote it and put my name on this report is how I experienced that first report. And the theme was COVID, obviously. And the question I had to figure out in June is, okay, Mr. Fancy Pants, UN Special Rapporteur, we're also in the midst of a hunger crisis. Before the pandemic's making it worse. What should we do? And then the other theme, I went on what I know more comfortably, and that's international trade. So I propose how international trade could be fundamentally different from a human rights perspective, and focus on hunger instead of economic growth. My second report also focuses on COVID as well. I feel a bit more comfortable because I was just more comfortable with the job. So that's sort of one of the basic things, is I have to write 2 big public reports, and I consult with other experts. I meet with peasant movements, labor unions, fisher folk, pastoralists, advocacy groups all over the world. So the one advantage of COVID is I don't have to travel as much as I don't travel, is I can do it all through here. The problem is I don't know what time zone I'm in, but that doesn't matter to my 4-year-old son because I have to be present. Like, life doesn't stop just because of the UN, right? So my priorities are my kid, my family life, UN, and then maybe me at the bottom. That's sort of just been the sequencing of care work that I've had to do. What that's also meant is there's a great irony is I'm on the list of the Food Security Task Force for the university. I see lots of people who are active in our own local community here. And what's weird is I've had to actually disengage from Eugene life and activism in Eugene, and because I'm putting more energy on the international front. And it feels weird. It feels almost like irresponsible. How could I? And I think many organizations, many peasant groups that have been involved internationally are making the same choice. Do we invest in international advocacy at these different UN committees? Or do we focus on our own communities which are suffering? And what I'm seeing is most people are making the logical decision is you focus at home first. People are struggling at home. You have to take care of your family and your neighbors and your kin and your people. And so I'm seeing the inequalities happening at the UN level. So I go to, I've presented to the World Trade Organization, to the Committee on World Food Security, to the General Assembly, and I'm seeing less and less peasant folk and less advocacy groups because they don't have the resources. Less poor countries, third world countries, developing countries, global south, however we want to call them. You only have so many diplomats and so many resources. Do you go to yet another UN meeting where you're going to have to try and fight the powers that be, or do you focus domestically? And so I'm witnessing those inequalities really getting worse through this particular struggle in this job. The second thing that I'm supposed to be doing that I'm not is traveling. So I'm supposed to pick 2 countries and I do country visits. I have to get invited, so I put a request to a country. Hi, I'd like to visit you and look at the state of the right to food and hunger and malnutrition in your country. And we could talk about why would a country let you in. If they accept my invitation, they have to show me everything. All government officials have to meet with me. I meet with local groups. I try and sort of get a feel of the place in about 2 weeks, but it's months of preparation before we get there. And then I write a public report outlining where a country's falling short and what they're doing well. And the power of these reports, what I'm learning is they can empower local groups and people within government who want to push things to do the right thing. So a UN report by the Special Rapporteur can galvanize sort of that political and social energy and push things in a particular direction. But I won't be traveling anytime soon, so it's unclear sort of, will I be able to do that? And then the third thing that I do is, and this is, I think, maybe where I have so on those things I don't have experience. I've never been a rapporteur. But the third element of the job, I have lots of experience, which is being a loudmouth, right? Just being someone where people talk to you, listen to you, quote you, reporters, government ministers. I have public meetings, I have private meetings. I can't think of a better word. The idea of platform, it gets overused as a word. But what I'm learning more importantly is when the UN Special Rapporteur speaks, people quote it as a position of authority. So now I have to be careful. I'm used, as you've already gathered, I think out loud, right? That's generally how I operate. When I teach in class, I'm a bit rambly. I sort of try and it's a give and take. But I'm now a lot more careful in certain forums, because when I speak in minutes, it's on Twitter, and now it's the rapporteur has said. So being a voice with some element of authority. So the first question I asked myself, and this is now shifted, so that's the basics of the job. No resources, the UN gives you nothing, right? So here's the politics of it all. Of course, all this power and authority, but no support. I have this tiny team. I have one person who's full-time in Geneva and one person who's half-time in Geneva who help me. But I get money if I were to travel to the country visits. I get money if I were to present my reports in New York and when I go to Geneva. And that's it for funding. And then it's just by beg, borrow, and steal. So again, you start to see, so what happens is rich governments might fund you, or if you're from a rich university, they might support you. Certain universities might give you teaching relief. So then it's, if you're a rapporteur from a rich country, from a rich university, you have more resources. If you're a rapporteur from a poor country or from a poorer school, it's usually academics. Or if you're working full time, you struggle. So you start to, again, just another element of how these inequalities are built into the system. So I got this position, and then I had to figure out how to position myself. How do I do this job? And what I decided to do, and this is really just from our conversations here in food studies and the work of others and people who've inspired me, is I thought, okay, how do I hold myself accountable? How do I hold myself responsible to the people that have the most at stake? Because the problem with all advocacy work, NGO work, or whatever, is that there's a tension between social movements, people organizing themselves to represent their own interests, versus professional advocates and professionals who may sometimes fill in that space or take up funding or end up speaking on behalf of people. And there's always that tension. And am I going to be yet another expert acting like I know all the answers, right? And that's sort of how I started, combined with I'm not the type of academic that has worked directly with communities very much. A little bit here and there, through the Food Resiliency Project, but not in any deep way. I've always struggled with this. And in law, I find it's even harder because law tends to be the tool of those with power. And it takes more work to imagine and make law a tool for those not with less power, but find it harder to use institutional power, right? For that social power. And so and as an academic, I've done historical work for that very reason, which is to create legal knowledge that might serve people, but not in a direct way. That's just the type of academic I've been, trying to find ways to work more directly with communities. So I start this position as I'm not the person that has those immediate ability of working directly with communities, right? And then what's it mean to work with communities at a global level, at an international level, as someone who's kind of in an institution, but totally independent. And so what I did is the way I dealt with it is I prioritized my time in a particular way. And the first thing I decided is I need to go make friends with the social movements. I need to earn their trust, introduce myself. Who am I? Where do I come from? What's my plan? How do I talk? What's it mean what's it mean to hang out with me? And I approached it in a spirit of friendship and solidarity. And those two ideas I've always carried with me in food studies, in my work as a teacher, in my work as a researcher. And so I had enough connections that people at least met me with a little less skepticism. So sort of through friends of friends. So through people who were more directly connected to the social movements, I knew those academics, one might call them embedded academics, right? And a lot of you are here, right? Those types of people. I knew those people that worked internationally. And because it's sort of like, oh, it's like going to a house party and it's like, oh, I don't know the host, but I know a friend of a friend. And you're like, oh, sure, the fridge is there. So I approached it like, oh, I'm a friend of, I'm, you know, like Colin's here. Colin knows some of these people. Oh, I'm a friend of Colin's. Oh, okay, we'll listen to this guy. And then, you know, within 3 minutes, I have to prove that I'm not an idiot or an opportunist, right? And sometimes they probably thought I was an idiot or an opportunist, who knows? And so I approached it in that spirit of friendship and solidarity. And again, in prioritization. So if I had to choose, immediately my inbox explodes. Everyone's trying to vie for my attention because of the position has that degree of power. And if I had to choose, for example, between a diplomat from a European country or a representative from the International Planning Committee of Food Sovereignty, it was a no-brainer for me. International Planning Committee for Food Sovereignty got priority, right? And then I would eventually get to the European Union. If I had to decide, you know, do I wake up at 5:30 a.m. to meet with the group that's representing the fisher folk on an international level? The answer is, okay, yeah, I can do it. But that would require the negotiations in my house, right? I have to negotiate with my spouse. I have to make sure my kid, you know, is taken care of. So then it becomes a domestic negotiation. And we're lucky here is that, well, there's an understanding, like that's the politics of how do we so if I have to wake up at 5:30 or 6:30, whatever, that means we all have to work together and take care of each other. And then I do the same for my spouse, right? Then we take turns over that. So there's that labor negotiation that happens to make it happen. So there's the solidarity as a family as well, knowing that you know, so my kid doesn't know it, but he's in the movement, right? He's fighting the power by, I'm like, listen, child, you have to be a really good boy today. You really have to brush your teeth right now because the fisher folk need you. Like, that's kind of the implicit deal that I'm trying to make with this ridiculous child of mine, right? Like that's how I thought about it. That's how, like, I've asked too much.
Part of history.
I've
No
asked too much.
child has ever done this before in history.
Pardon?
Make certain your children know that this is part of history.
Oh, hardly. You know, he just needs to get through preschool. That's his job in life. Maybe later if he cares. He doesn't need to know what I do for a living. He's got his own life to struggle. My job is to make sure he eats and sleeps and.
No, what he's going through right now, he is being part of history.
He's in
He
it.
knows
He's
you yell at
totally
the computer, Michael.
Yeah, he's totally in it. And so, and that's, you know, that's how I would balance things is, you know, have I asked too much from my spouse and from my son? And that means I can't meet with people. I can't devote my time to this person or that person. I can't write that extra op-ed. I can't do that extra video. And so it's all been about sort of not managing my time. It's just been about managing my work and my care work, my academic work, my scholarly work. And all of that. So that's just sort of how I've situated myself in the thing. And then I'll just sort of share what I've learned coming from our particular food studies program. You know, a lot of what I described, I hope sounds familiar to how we've all worked together, right? We all sort of help each other out, teach in each other's classes. For example, like Harper has opened up the urban farm to the law school students in that same spirit of friendship and solidarity. Hey, Harper, can we come shovel shit at the farm? Come on down. Anytime you got it, right? Like it's that ethos. And then when we go, what I always tell students is, you know, Harper teaches differently than I do, but what it ends up being is we're hanging out, right? Through that long-standing relationship of hanging out, listening, doing, working together. That's how we're learning. And so I've been a good student hanging out with Harper. I take that same spirit when I'm meeting with other workers, right? Other people who are working the land is, I'm here to learn, I'm here to hang out. And then however I can help, let's figure that out. I bring certain skills, I have certain strengths, but I also know my limitations. I'll end with some of sort of what I've been up to in sort of specific sense. So there's a big fight. So in the UN, there's all these different institutions and offices and this and that, and we all know COVID is a global health crisis. And in the newspapers, you'll hear about the WHO, the World Health Organization. And so the WHO has been the place where there's been a global debate over distribution of vaccinations. Who gets vaccinations? How do we manage and coordinate and organize the distribution of vaccinations, trying to make it equitable, because we're seeing again those inequalities happen. And for political reasons, we saw the United States withdraw from the WHO. And now after the elections and with the new administration, the US is coming back into the WHO. The part that is not in the newspapers is the hunger crisis part. Well, that is in the papers, but the UN element is the Committee on World Food Security, known as the CFS, yet another acronym. And just yesterday, they had their big annual meeting, and my job was to literally wag my finger and say, why are you not coordinating world governments, and working together and serving the most vulnerable and most marginalized people? And there's a fight, and what I find interesting about this particular UN office, the Committee on World Food Security, is that what they call civil society, but social movements, advocacy groups, labor unions have a seat at that table. They have a formal position to shape the agenda. So it's unique, it's very inclusive in that regard. But I'm seeing the politics of how do you include people but keep and yet marginalize their voice, right? So I'm in that fray, and multiple events, different things, is trying to push and understand where the blockage is. And I know that I'm not going to solve the problem, but what I can do, so here's what and I'm still kind of reflecting now out loud, is what I think I've been able to do is, and I only get 3 minutes to speak. If I get 5 minutes, that's luxurious. So I've learned to be succinct, again, as a legal academic loudmouth. These are all new skills of being succinct. But in 3 minutes, how do I crystallize everything I've been hearing? So that's the other skill that this job is I bear witness. I bear witness to all people's struggles by talking to unions and talking and listening and learning, and then trying to find a way of articulating what's happening and solutions that are not, again, the expertise comes almost more in organizing and managing knowledge in a particular way, and of course giving it my own particular push. And I'm now confident that my particular idiosyncratic push might be right, because I'm also holding myself accountable to governments, to people, by being a public speaker. And when I get things wrong, as I do, people tell me. God, they do tell me, right? And again, and I adapt, and I try and make my mistakes public. So even the criticism of me, we all learn in that particular way. So that, I just threw out a lot, but so I just turn it now back to the group for a conversation.
Very energetic.
Lisa and Stephen, how do we manage? Do we have people raise their hand?
I think people can raise their hand and it'll come up, and Lisa and I can help kind of identify people, and people can raise their little hand at the bottom there, the reaction button, and we can go from there. And that's worked out pretty well.
Right.
Let's try that. You covered a lot of ground, Michael, there, and in your characteristically excited and informed and engaging way. So thanks a lot for doing that. And let's open it up to comments here. Harper's got his hand up, I think. Go ahead, Harper.
Oh, I was just going to say, Michael, we're all fancy pantses just like you. I'll just try to be as forceful, and with as much grace.
No, it's a collective win. I think me getting this position, to reflect Stephen's point, I mean, this is, I think it's a collective win in the sense of it shows our community of food studies here at Oregon and Lane County, right? Really, the particular perspective we have here, even though I'm not as involved here, I'm watching what is working well in Eugene. We're all struggling, and there are certain things we're doing right here. And I think it's because we've got strong infrastructure in our social connections, right?
History. There's a good long history too of working.
Yeah, and the part that I'm still, I'll leave it for when I'm done this position, is sort of what can we learn in Eugene and Lane County from these international struggles, and how can we connect better our local struggles with the international struggles? And many of us already do that, right? And so just by bringing that international back home, that would be something we could talk more later on, of how to deepen our international solidarity, because that's also unique, I think, for us here, is we have that. We don't have to argue that the international matters here, that we know that, and it's more a practical debate we would have amongst each other.
I think that's great for like something like a city club talk at some point later when you do have space for that kind of like both ways, what comes out of here and what comes in here. And I think that's critically important. Maybe you could just say a little bit more about like the technical details. I was just like, how many years do you serve
Yeah.
and stuff like that?
It's 3 years, and
3
in
years. Okay.
theory, you usually get renewed for another 3 years. Like you have to
Okay.
sort of present yourself up again for the renewal. To
Mhm.
be honest, it's been so intense through COVID that I
Mhm.
don't know if I'm gonna try to renew.
Right.
I'm putting so much in it right now,
Mm.
and because the stakes are so high right now, I always try and struggle against war metaphors. This might be because I'm from Lebanon, and war
Mhm.
metaphors in the United States get overused. Nevertheless, the feeling I have is truly not just the front line, sometimes almost behind enemy lines, right? Being that institutional actor. And it's that feeling of, 1 week of work in this particular job, in this particular moment, feels sometimes like 3 months worth of work.
Mhm.
And so what I tell myself is write every report like it's my last one. Go to every meeting like every meeting might be the most important meeting, because I also don't know who's listening. So it's three. It's so I have I so it's almost coming up to a year. May it'll be a year. So 2 years and change are left.
Mhm.
And I had to take leave from teaching between my kids' health and my health. I had to take leave from teaching this semester because I just couldn't do it. I was actually burnt out because when I was teaching in the fall, my priority, right, take care of my family, take care of myself. Well, you're supposed to take care of yourself first, right? That's what they tell you. Myself, my family, neighbors, my family in Lebanon, right? There was that explosion. And then my students, most of my teaching was starting class with, okay, how you all doing? I'm lucky, unlike others like Dan and others, I didn't have hundreds of students. I had, a more manageable where I could start with, how could I teach food law and not ask people, how are you doing? Sharing recipes, sharing that idea of giving them the advice that I should be giving myself, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. That took a lot out of me too. So I know I burnt out that I had to take leave from teaching, right?
Other folks want to jump in with questions for Michael, comments? Dan, go ahead, Dan.
Physical hands. I see Momo and Mary, and Dan with a virtual hand.
Yep.
I just learned how to do that yesterday.
Good job, Dan.
Sat all through another talk or the Q&A period trying to figure out how to raise my hand and missed my chance to ask a
Share
question.
with others. How could others raise their hand, Dan?
Oh, in the reactions. And I kept going to reactions and I kept looking at all of the emoji things and didn't notice that the really big one says raise hand.
There you go.
So it was right in front of me.
Mary, if you look at the bottom on the far right,
right.
you'll see reactions. Yeah.
Yep. And it's at the top usually.
Yeah, exactly. And at the bottom there, it'll say raise hand. It'll have like a horizontal bar.
Mhm.
And you can also clap and
yeah.
And
I mean,
now
I'll take LOL emojis.
There you go.
We'll do Dan, then Mary, then Momo, and then call it. How's that?
Okay.
I just see how I already talk with authority. I'll just create a talking list.
You're negotiating.
Go ahead, Dan, please.
I was curious. So you talked about, this job feeling sometimes like you're working behind enemy lines. And of course, one of the sort of critiques of things like the UN is that they end up being sort of a Band-Aid, that legitimize a lot of the existing power structures, et cetera. And so I'm really curious to hear what's going right. Like what, as you're immersed in that, what are like the positive things, the positive energies, the things that are going right that you're seeing?
What's been really what makes me not feel lonely is the social movements, is that there's a very long and rich and robust tradition of the food movements engaging with the UN system. And that started in the mid 90s with the World Food Conference of, I want to say 96. I think that year is right. Starting with that conference, when social movements decided that they needed a more formal way of intervening with these UN structures, not from the outside, but sort of inside, outside, around, through, and all of that. And that 25-year tradition is there. And so when someone like me shows up, I know who I have to talk to. And I don't have to, it's easier for me to get a better sense of what people who have the most at stake are feeling. So very quickly, they're more sophisticated than me in the UN system because they've been in that struggle in the institutional struggle for 25 years. So they were, I realized quickly who should kind of guide me through the UN system. Obviously there's the institutional actors, but then there's the trade union. So the big union is the IUF, the International Union of Food Workers. That's the short name of it, but it's huge. And very quickly, you know, they reached out to me, and because they know, Special Rapporteur, they knew they were waiting for, they knew the timeline better than I did. And they reached out to, I think they reached out to me like the day after, or like soon after I found out. They knew I got it before I did. People on social media knew I got the position before I did. And so what I'm seeing is social movements are strong. They're struggling, but strong. And the part that I'm trying to define my own measure of success is not in institutional terms. What I'm hoping is at the end of this, if those movements are even stronger and have new alliances, if there's, and you know, the protests in India are another great inspiration. That protest in India is an example of new solidarity. It's the strength and longevity of that struggle is based on the new alliance between farmers and workers. It's land and labor solidarity. And those two groups don't always get along. That's not an easy alliance, right? Because small farmers and peasants are employers too. But that struggle is an inspiration for me. And so that's where I'm like, okay, it's still worth it because, and so the definition of success is as long as people are still strong enough to struggle and fight and articulate their demands, that's a win. Not measuring institutional wins and losses. I have to be more historical in that sense. And, you know, being someone historically minded, knowing that what feels like and in law, it's the same. You might lose a case, but in the broader strategic campaign, it might still be a win, right?
Thanks.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Mary, then Momo, then Colin.
Thank you, Mike. I just wanted to comment first that I think one of the great things about food studies and the study of food is its inclusion. And this is a great shining example of it. And part my question was, I think Dan already sort of asked it, but one of the other questions was, and I was peeling my hard-boiled eggs, so I may not have heard when you said, what support are you getting from the U of O for this?
Good question.
And how can we support you?
Well, we're being recorded and we're live, so let me think of a diplomatic response.
Okay. Let me,
I've had to make several arguments to encourage UO support. One is I had to explain, you know, what's this position, and that's, you know, that's sure, fair, and why it's in the UO's interest to support this position, but I did this while, of course, we're in the midst of a pandemic and there's tight resources and this and that. The other difficulty is it's also hard to ask for help when you're struggling yourself, right? Sometimes, so other places what I know is if they're more well attuned to sort of international stuff or that type of work where you're between social movements and why it connects to research and to teaching and this and that, they can almost come to you with like, hey, you know, can we help? There wasn't a can we help you? It's sort of, I need help. Here's how you can help me. Here's what I need, etc. And I still wasn't sure what I needed at that front end. The thing that I think, again, I'm trying to be careful. The part that I think is the most important isn't so much money as it's time. Time. And that's been the toughest. So what I've been trying to do, and I slowly did, is try and find a way to connect my teaching to this position. And what I've been slowly muddling in my own way is, because for me, the first thought I thought is, how do I get my students involved? This is an opportunity for students to learn while, you know, learning while they're doing. Not only that, learning while being political, like learning in the struggle. And that's a skill. That's a real skill when the moment is now. You don't get, no one says, okay, in 2 years, the revolution will start in September, and let's have 3 meetings. And when the revolution starts, this is your job. It's here, right? We're in it. And so you better be ready, and you just grab what tools you have. And so I've had to learn, how do I be that teacher on the fly? And the way I've operated is that I've basically worked within what structures I've had, and I haven't been able to carve out a different space or different opportunities with U of O. Now, how can food studies help? I'm at the point where I have, the generosity of so many people, and I need time to catch my breath, to organize myself, to know how to ask for the right help in a way that's productive. And here's what I've learned about myself. I'm not a fast moving object. I take time. I'm a slow person. I need to hang out, get to know the person, because the way I try not to be hierarchical. Now, the advantage of being hierarchical is you move fast, right? Yep. I have dictated X, thou shalt do it this way, and let it be so. I'm a lot more relational, and I want people to find their own way in it. And that takes time, getting to know people. And I try and get people like, who are you? Like, I introduce myself. So who are you? What do you want? How can you find your own way? I'll describe this project, or this movement, or this situation. God knows there's an infinite amount of work to be done, right? And I can give you a sense of priorities and this and that. And then it's a matter of others finding their way in it, and then me trying to make the right introductions, or ask for the right thing, or say, okay, great. Can you do this for me? Or can you do this for this person, and this and that? So the advantage of being, so that's sort of, our strengths and weaknesses are often the same thing, right? So the advantage of being more relational is, in times of great need, I leaned on friends and comrades, right? I had people, like on that first report in the darkest hour, ghostwrite sections, right? I need you to write about solidarity economics in 1,000 words. Go. And they're like, I don't know. They're like, I kind of know. Can you help me? I'm like, I can give you no guidance. Just send it to me. And my job is then to connect all the different parts of the report, make it coherent, make it cohesive. And they had to trust me to do that. And I'm like, look, all I can give you is a fancy title. You can be senior advisor of the Special Rapporteur. That's all. And in academia, you can use that to show a practical intervention. And it's real, to show that you've actually made a dent in the universe somehow. And so by having already existing relationships, I can move fast in some regards, in some ways, right? Now, to work, here's the fantasy too, is once we can all travel and all, I want to bring all the people I'm meeting to Eugene, right? Do you all, some of you remember that food justice conference right before I moved here 10 years ago, that sort of invigorated our program here. I want to bring all the unions and the peasant movements and the advocates and the civil society, civil servants and all of that, and come to hang out in Willamette Valley, because we all know this is a place that makes you stronger and better, and like, who doesn't love hanging out here, right? And connecting, that makes our community better, and makes the movement better. So the end goal for me as a member of our community is, when the time is right, and that, maybe this is my big push to everyone. Let's start thinking maybe in 2 years, when my mandate is done, it culminated in a big, I don't know if you read Asterix and Obelix, like a big banquet at the end of the comic book, right? Like a big banquet of just like, my God, we just survived the pandemic. Woo, let's now just, empower each other to continue the struggle. So start thinking in those terms.
A little note on something maybe more pragmatic too, is the Global Studies Initiative that's going on in CAS may well be also a venue. So there you go. Anyway, those are great. That's great. That's a great plan. I love it. Let's go for it.
Momo and Colin are next in the line.
Actually going to David, who's also here.
All right, there you go. Turn that camera.
So you talked about like burning out, which sounds very like intense. How do you prevent that now? I guess you've talked a little bit about going slower, but if you think about maybe the practices you engage in, because I feel like going slow is the hardest part of like special and intense and important
I
work?
am the worst person to ask that question, but I'll do my best because I did burn out, right? I did burn out and I'm always on the verge of it. So slowing that speed and being in control of my speed and trying to be sharper about my priorities. Like what, everything matters. Okay. So where can I be more strategic in that intervention and being honest with myself? Being honest with myself, right? So like, okay, that didn't go well, or oops, that didn't work, or oh my God, I didn't sleep properly. And learning how to ask for help. I'm getting better at that. I just don't have, I have all the vices. Name a vice. Sure, right? Gluttony, sloth, I can't focus, right? All of those things. And I think, and I think here's the other thing is what enables me to get through the job is being honest with people. So the way I'm talking to you today, the way I talk in private meetings, the way I talk in public meetings is more or less the same, right? It's more or less where I'm trying to present myself in as not as an expert, but as someone with a particular knowledge and a particular experience that's sharing for whatever it's worth. At times people have said, we need you to be the lawyer. I'm like, okay, you asked me for help. I'll be the lawyer. I can be the lawyer. I've been trained enough to do that job, right? But I can also not be I can be the diplomat. I can be the mediator. I can be the rabble rouser, right? That's the default, right, to the barricades. So that's my non-answer, David, which is I'm always reflecting on it and having and surrounding with people around me to be like, hey, you're burning out. You're a fool, right? Stop doing the thing.
Mhm.
Can I also ask a quick question?
Go for it. Yep.
That was also great. And it's so good to see everyone. I couldn't chat you all individually, but hi everyone, I love you. Just thinking about what you were saying about access and about during COVID and meetings being held on Zoom and how that's widening inequalities within representation. I'm just thinking about specifically people in rural areas who don't have access to internet. Like right now we work in Arizona and we're doing a partnership with Hopi youth who don't really have access to internet. So we have meetings over Zoom and half the time like they can't be present because their internet connection is so bad. No. So thinking about working, in the global south or just areas where there isn't access to internet and now with everything shifted online, do you see, obviously you can call in to some extent with Zoom, but how well do you think the UN and are you reaching people who don't have access to internet but are still engaging in the kind of work that should be? It's
a disaster everywhere, but whether it's the UN or it's advocacy group in Arizona or it's another faculty meeting at the U of O, it's all this is built in, right? We're all going to come out. The inequality is going to be worse after this. So what I'm trying to think is after the fact. So I can't stop global inequality not like this in the midst of a pandemic. It's how do I try and keep people strong so that when we're a bit better, we can work. So part of it is me trying to stop meetings, to say meet less, do less, produce less research, less meetings, less whatever. And in terms, to go back to David's point, 80% of our meetings are actually not useful, right? For the most part. And so I attend, like my bullshit meter is is sharper. Like, is this truly a useful meeting or is it bullshit, right? So I try to make every word I say matter. Every encounter needs to matter. And that's to go back. Every report, everything I do has to be as if it might be the last one I'm doing. Because it very well might be. It might be, okay, this is the only time we're able to meet because life is happening in this very particular way, right? And people are getting more tired and more sick. This might be the last time that this person's able to be in it, so I better make it matter. So it's just sharpening those moments of when we do meet collectively. That's a big deal. Like, how many are we? We're 25 people right now. That means the world to me that you all were able and chose to come together and hang out and talk about this. well, then my job is to make it your worthwhile, like, to make it. And because I know many of you and there's new people here, it's sort of like, okay, these are my people. So I'm actually I suspect I'm taking more out of this gathering than I'm giving, because I need it. Like, that's what I like, oh my God, I need my people so much right now. I miss everyone, right? And it's that, so gathering, let's, not underestimating and undervaluing the ability of coming together, what that means. Who did you choose to pod with? Who did you choose to not necessarily pod with, but like meet in your backyard or on your front porch in social distance? Who did you decide to walk your dog with across the street and sort of hang out? Who do you drop off food for? Those are hard political decisions we're all making right now. And I think that's the priority for me.
Colin, I think you're next in the queue there.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Michael. I was about the burnout thing. I was going to say burnout is, a lot of it's structural, right? We're and cultural. And so there's, some things you can work on and some things that we need to collectively work against. But I was just going to say that the thing that's been in that regard for me, and I've struggled with it a lot over the years, is having, peers, people I work with both inside and outside of the academy that been able to develop like pretty open and honest relationships where you can share the worst and the best of what's going on and have people talk you through it and not have to solve your problems, but be there for you. I mean, that's been so key. And that's why communities like this are good, but also deepening them through more individual, intimate encounters, right? Anyways, and so like having Michael come in and talk about your, the different balancing acts you go through to do whatever it is that you're going through in your life, like whether you're a student or a activist or the special rapporteur, opening that up and starting to reflect on that ourselves is really a gift too, because then you can see that there are lots of people going through similar struggles, and that's really amazing. So anyways, then I wanted to turn, I'm curious because, the UN Food Summit is this thing. I had to step up for a second. I think you were talking about it a little bit, but there's this UN Food Summit, and generally there's this great concern over corporate capture of global governance, and the UN Food Summit in New York in particular is being driven by the World Economic Forum, and they've appointed someone to be the kind of chair of the process that's kind of one of the, is a lead proponent of agribusiness and so forth. And so a lot of social movements are opting out, some people are opting in. And so I'm just, you as a special rapporteur in this really, unique position, because you're kind of independent and you're asked to contribute to things, you get access to processes. And this is just one example. Like, how do you walk the line between, and you are doing a good job of it, I think, because the stuff that you're writing is like walk the line between participating in a process, thus giving it legitimacy, versus critiquing it or even opting out of it at some point, which is an option, right? And so right now you have a hot example where you can kind of talk us through a bit about how you feel that. That's wondering if you could share some of your thoughts.
Thank you, Colin. I think so the Food Systems Summit is a summit that was called for by the Secretary General. It's happening in the fall. And as Colin pointed out, the politics of it are complicated, and I'm on what's called the integrative team. So I'm at one of the highest levels of watching how decisions are being made, and I've been invited to tell them how to do human rights correctly, because one of the criticisms is that human rights was nowhere on the agenda. And as Colin points out, the danger is my power and authority comes from being independent, but the minute I become deeper into one particular institution, whether it's a summit like this or the Committee on World Food Security, where I'm on the advisory group, they can say, but we have the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food, giving themselves that legitimacy. Again, just reflecting what Colin's saying. I think law as a discipline is always about that tension. I think, so when I'm teaching students, the minute you use the language of law, you have inevitably legitimized the very institution that you're fighting against, right? Often the minute you have to use the language of law, you've lost, usually, because of those structural inequalities built into it. So, for me, the way I'm answering your question, Colin, is really day by day. And it's, again, by talking to everybody around me and being as honest with all players, all players, whether it's whether I'm talking to World Economic Forum, World Bank, La Via Campesina, or an advocacy group, is always articulating what does it mean to me to be independent, and what is my particular opinion and position. The context, and it's day by day, and I think by treating it as a regular reflective practice that I do as publicly as possible is the only way I can sort of muddle through it. And I think that key point you said at the end, and I always remind myself, is I can always withdraw from the process, right? I can always withdraw because so I always have to have some, I'm always in institutional spaces, nevertheless. It's the Human Rights Council. I'm like, but in the end, I go to the Human Rights Council. That's the source of what I do. And governments. So I can rail against governments and say, you governments aren't doing what you're supposed to do. But I also know, I feel I can yell as loud and as honestly as possible, because that's what they told me to do. They empowered me to yell at them, right? That's the human rights dynamic of it all. And the part that I'm also acutely aware of is that it's, I come from a left tradition that critiques human rights, which is different than the sort of the more American style of critiquing human rights. International human rights is not relevant, or treating American style of rights as unique. I come from a tradition that says, human rights is often a language that disempowers and that masks inequality, and that powerful governments use to criticize developing countries, et cetera, et cetera. I come in skeptical of the very tools that I use. I'm a law professor that's skeptical and careful about law, but by knowing those limitations so well, I think I use them sharply, but also it's a testament to the power of social movements that they've made the right to food specifically, not human rights broadly, but social movements over the 25 years have given me the tool to allow me to be independent, right? The social movements have made the right to food very radical. It's very actually inspiring to take the radical understanding of the right to food, which is well developed, and radicalize all of human rights, right? That's the other sort of agenda that I have in the back of my mind. So that element of trying to maintain my autonomy and expertise, and the other community I hold myself accountable are my comrades and friends from international law, that sort of where I came from in that first place, which is called third world approaches to international law. That's sort of where I think, if what I'm doing, would they tar and feather me, right? And so knowing where I'm from, like that question of who are you and where are you from is a big one. Knowing where I'm from, we could talk about Lebanon, but we're out of time. But would people in Lebanon, if I articulate a right of food to someone in Lebanon, are they going to just roll their eyes and be like, hey, human rights? That's just that's yet another NGO project. Don't come to us with that. And if I articulate the way I'm doing the right to food to the food sovereignty movement, is it going to honor the way they've radicalized it? If I articulate the right to food to the World Economic Forum in a way, are they going to at least listen to me, maybe adjust what they do, but I have to make sure they don't appropriate it. And I'll tell them, like, you don't get to appropriate it. I can say that because I can say whatever I want. So I think that's it. And to your point, Colin, and not internalize those institutional limitations, right? That's part of the burnout, is where we start to think, oh, the institutional problems are my problems, and trying to remember, wait, that's not my job. That's that person's job. That's that person's job. So the language of human rights is the language of obligations. Well, what's our obligation to each other living together? And it's saying, this is your job to do X, Y, and Z. My job is to do exactly what I'm doing, wag my finger, right?
I'm just going to pop in. It's 1 o'clock now, and if you're okay to stay a little bit longer, that'd be great. If not, we can break
Maybe
there.
just a few more minutes, because at 1:15, speaking of obligations, I have my students that I like working with.
Perfect.
And
So
one's here, but we have work to do.
great questions, great presentation so far. One question I have that might kind of help us follow: is there a place to follow what you're doing? Like, is there a Twitter, or what's the best kind of
to go
place?
back to what I need a communications person, and I don't have the money or the ability or any of that. I'm the worst. I'm so analog. Like before we started today, like, do you have slides? I just laughed. Like, nope. I just
Well,
That's how I
let's
teach. This is how I talk to my mom. This is how I advocate. This I just yell.
let's follow up offline about that, because we might be able
But
to find
Twitter,
something
the
that
one
helps
social
you
media
do
I do use is Twitter, and it's just at Michael Fakhri. Here, I'll put it in the chat.
that. Yeah.
Um,
So that's one thing, because to keep a finger on what you're up to, so we in the local kind of scene can see what kind of things you're doing.
yeah, and exactly. So there, I'm slowed down. I was gonna say I slowed down on cat memes, but with the latest one with the lawyer saying I'm not a cat, I mean that one is too good to let go. But
Yeah.
so now my Twitter feed is a lot more official.
Okay.
So you'll see how I'm presenting myself as a more of an official person and you'll see videos and quotes and reports and that through the Twitter feed is the best.
For and folks who have come to this space, the food studies space, to hear you and hear what you're up to, who haven't necessarily been part of the food studies world. So just a link to them, to find us. The easiest place to find food studies, Food Studies, is on Facebook. I know people don't use it. Some people don't, but if you're here and you're learning about what food studies is, just like us on Facebook, and then you'll get updates about all these talks like Michael's. Back to the questions and comments, if people have additional things for Michael.
I think, it's people probably have stuff. So thank you everyone.
Yeah. Let us know, like Michael, thank you so much for this presentation, because I think one of the things that I really admire about you is exactly what you were describing, the approach. The topic of right to food is important, and the substance of that is important, but process, the way people do things, is like probably more important than the subject sometimes, and especially for stuff like this. So I think there's a lot of really important stuff happening in the way that you're doing what you're doing. I'm sure the substance is important too, but the way that you do it is instructive. It's instructive for students, for colleagues, for people in international organizations and stuff. And I think that's one of the most kind of like long-term impacts. It's like that guy just approached this in a different way.
That random guy from Eugene who I saw at the pub the other day can do it. That means anyone can do this job. I mean, I hope that's the big takeaway.
And I think that's super important. That's really important work, and I pray, really proud of the fact that you're doing it, and that you're from this campus. And let us know offline and stuff if there's stuff that we can do as individuals, that the program can do to help support you. Various people that are in the ribbon here have connections to people that might be able to help, whether it's somebody to help with a Twitter feed or somebody to help with some more global kind of engagement support that should be coming your way that isn't. So feel free to hit us up outside.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
May I comment?
Please do.
I put my hand up a couple of times.
Oh, sorry.
It disappeared. I don't use Zoom that
Okay.
much. I'm a layman, Michael, but I found your presentation riveting. You obviously are both self-aware and self-deprecating, which is, along with your skills, is obviously tantamount to what you do. First off, I'd like to ask, how's your family after the explosion?
They're well. Thank you for asking. Their health is good. They were close to it. They're doing. But thank you so much for asking, David.
That was devastating.
It was collective trauma, for lack of a better term.
Talk about a human rights violation.
Yeah. I'm gonna post. On that. On Lebanon, people in Lebanon asked me to write a right to food manifesto for Lebanon. I've never worked so hard in my life. Like, I put all of everything I've got into that, and I'll share it with the food studies, and it'll circulate. It'll be in English and in Arabic as well. How do you draft a right to food plan? Don't have not just Lebanon. When you don't have a federal government that operates the way it should.
Yeah.
Hypothetically, it could be anywhere these days, right? Yeah.
It's a top-down approach that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Another couple of things is I don't know if this is a new position or, but keep in mind that regardless, you have had to reinvent it like no one has ever had to before. And I implore you not to lose focus on that. You know, it's a brand new thing.
Yeah. Thank you.
And what you're doing is important work. And you cannot serve two masters. And I know you have a hard time with, I can't do local stuff anymore. But you know what? It's like, you know, it's like our local city councilor that we elected to the Senate. You're now in the Senate. You can be, you know, you can be aware and you know, support local stuff, but you've got to put your focus where it needs to be.
Yeah.
And
Thanks,
that's
David.
where I will leave it.
Thank you for leaving me sort of, I mean, everyone left me really energized and empowered, and thank you for giving me that sort of reflecting back to keep me strong. That means a lot to me. Thank you.
Well, your work means a lot to more people than you. Well, more people than you know. You know them.
Love it. Great.
And I think, you know, the people who are here at the U of O, I think it's important to share out the work that Michael's doing. Sometimes this campus can be really kind of like out of it in terms of the stuff that people are doing in the community locally and nationally and definitely internationally. It's amazing how little people know. So everyone who's here who has a U of O connection, tell your colleagues, you know what I mean? Tell your friends and colleagues and students about what's going on, the work that Michael's doing. And I think that increases the effect of the stuff that you're doing too, so that people carry that message. I think, Lisa, do you want to just mention the next talk that's coming out?
Sure, I put it in the chat too.
Okay,
Our
great.
talk will be Friday, March 12th. The title is Fire is Food, and it's featuring Ron Reed and Kari Norgard.
Right on.
Yeah.
Information on our Facebook page and website, along with the link to register in advance.
That'll be fantastic.
Perfect. Very good.
FYI, my daughter took your class when she was at UO Law, Michael, and she very much enjoyed it.
Oh, great. Well, that's nice to hear. That's really nice.
Good. Thank you, Michael. Thanks for all that you're doing, and thanks for taking time to be with us here in this community. You know, it's really important to us, and I think you said you were energized. I think, you know, I can speak for this whole crew. Hearing what you're up to is energizing, and it makes us realize, you know, everything matters, like you say. You know, even conversations that you have. So thanks so much for being who you are and doing what you're doing.
Thank you, everyone. Lovely to see you. Enjoy your day. Enjoy your weekends. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Take care of yourself.